Dr. Kirk Honda, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Hearing you say that phrase, I've been listening to you on the podcast for almost 2 decades. It's
Wow.
so bizarre to actually be talking to you as you're saying those phrases. Welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Yeah. Well, last week you interviewed me, and I thought you did a terrific job giving me space to share my personal and family saga. And you were very generous in your praise. And I'm so impressed by your podcasting accomplishments that I worry our audience might suspect a backroom deal of quid pro quo, one hand washing the other, so to speak. But I have to tell you, I am just generally so impressed by the work that you're doing and all that you've accomplished. And it's miles away from what, in some ways, from what I was doing and attempting. And so I want to start in an area where there's no comparison. You wrote me that as of 2023, the podcast and YouTube channel have grown to include over 3,000 episodes, 330,000 YouTube subscribers, and several paying members on Patreon and YouTube. And beyond this, each week you publish a 3-hour-long audio episodes about a dozen 20-minute videos.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, I was gobsmacked by this. I mean, I thought my initial reaction was a bit suspicious. I hate to admit being so suspicious, but I figured, okay, he must have used black hat techniques and purchased likes, which is possible to do, or at least it used to be. And but as I dug into your site, it became clear to me that that's not what you had done, but that in fact what you had done was delivered great content, really addressing people. I realized it was a lot of passion and a lot of hard work, harder work than I'm willing to do, at least at this point in my life. So I was really impressed by that.
Well, hearing that from you is really quite a thing for me, because you led the way. You were the biggest psychology podcaster, the first psychology podcaster for a long time, and still are making amazing episodes. So yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a workaholic, which is kind of a problem.
Yeah, I could see that definitely would make sense. That would lurk in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I know that as the show has grown, you've brought other people on, and I listened to sample episodes just to get a sense of who each of those folks are, good friends of yours from your past. And but I still have the sense that it's very much your show. Even if they're on, it's definitely your show, your conversation. It's a very firm imprint there. And so to me, that kind of fits with what you're saying about, that you really own it, I think, and you need to own it. And it's had a wonderful effect. I mean, I was looking for the magic sauce, and I realized, wait a second, that is the magic sauce, is your devotion to this. For a time, you let me know that your numbers were languishing. You'd been doing it for some years, and you weren't seeing this big boost. Now, I note that you have your BA was in business. So I'm wondering, did that come in handy? Did you do something? Did you change something up that led to this big sort of kick up that later came along?
Possibly, yeah. I didn't know what to get my bachelor's degree in when I was 18, 19 years old. And I just decided on, you and I have a similar background there. We started out as engineering and
Yeah.
then switched, and you switched to creative writing, and I switched to business because my older sister had, she's sort of a mentor in college for me. And so I just did what she did. And I thought, well, business acumen can be applied in a lot of different sorts of jobs. So I thought, I don't know what I want to do, but I'll take this. And yeah, I sort of specialized in marketing. And then you and I also have a similar background in market research and focus groups. And I don't remember it being directly used by me when I was trying to get the podcasts off the ground, but marketing is a big part of having a successful business of any sort, and
Yeah.
including an internet business, particularly an internet business like a podcast.
What I was struck by as I got into your site, among other things, was, wait a second, what's just popped up here on my screen blocking my view? The topics that you took up, and you've indicated that topics sometimes were straight psychology stuff that you'd planned, but also that you began to get into uh, things that were going on in the world, in the news, on social media, etc. And so you took, which is something I've never done. I've never felt comfortable doing that. But you were comfortable diving in and really putting a lot of devotion and effort into speaking to people's questions so that it became really sort of psychology for the people, if you will.
Hmm.
And that really impressed me. And you did it with such earnestness. For example, one of the things that I was drawn to, and I want to ask you more about this, about topics and so on, but one that caught my interest was the slap at the Oscars a couple years ago, or last year, however long it was. And you really dug into that, and you did a whole bunch of research on apologies and the process of apologizing. And you read the literature on apologizing, and then you decided that the literature was incomplete as far as you were concerned. And so you came up with your own schema for apology. You added some other elements that the literature had left out.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was remarkable. And it was such a genuine thing for you to do, such your own genuine engagement and willingness to invest your time and energy and creativity and thoughts and all on that. And not a rote thing. I feel like sometimes mine is fairly rote because I'm interviewing a person and, I've got whatever material they've provided me with, and that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't go do a lot of outside research. I don't invent new theories, etc. I was just so taken by that. Talk about a bit about that process and that part of you that does that. And at what point did that begin?
Oh, well, I'm honored that you would see that and summarize it. No one's ever summarized it like that. And everything you're saying is like, yeah, I guess that is how it is. I love to get into projects. I get really obsessive about projects. If it is something in the house that I want to fix up, or something on the podcast. And apologies I discovered over time in my clinical work is a really big part of mental wellness and relationship wellness that is not emphasized enough. A really heartfelt, good apology process can repair just about any transgression in a relationship, not only between my clients in my office, but from me to them. There's a lot of repair and healing that can happen when I apologize to a client. And then I started getting a lot of requests. A lot of what I do on the podcast has to do with people asking me to do things. And when the requests reach a certain critical mass, then I'm like, oh, maybe I should actually do it because I don't know, I just feel obligated that way. And so I started to somewhat specialize in analyzing public apologies from Donald Trump, from Bill Clinton, from Chris Brown, these individuals, and as you're referring to, Will Smith. And I didn't see on the internet, on YouTube, a satisfying discourse around the reactivity to public apologies. There was a lot of talk, and a lot of it's valuable, but nothing that was research based and psychologically based in the literature. And so I wanted to bridge that gap. And when you say psychology for the people, that's just a huge compliment from coming from you. And it is maybe what I am doing and have been doing.
Yeah,
Because
I think that's kind of your trademark. And I'll give you another example, because I'm not so interested in going deeply into the apology topic as you are wont to do. But also another one that caught my eye was, and I didn't recognize the name, but I guess it's a famous case of a woman who she drove her car into the water and drowned her children. Do I have that right? I've forgotten the details of the case.
Well, Casey Anthony was charged with killing her child, her, I think, 3-year-old child. And we did a whole series of episodes on that. But yeah, so we talk about things like that as well. I often will have my co-host Umberto on the podcast talk about things like that, because he knows a lot about those kinds of stories, those kind of public figures.
Yeah. Yeah. So so people contact you, they express some interest. Do you have a discussion board or someplace where they post their questions and then you accumulate them?
Yeah. So on Patreon, there's a community area. Sometimes I'll take a poll. YouTube, there's a lot of comments there. And then people just email me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So from their comments and the kinds of requests, some of the dialogue that I encountered between you and your audience showed a high level of engagement, and that they really, I think they just felt like they can ask for what they want, and that they're going to get a good opinion from you. And I think that's remarkable. I'm not sure if anybody else is doing that. I think it's pretty unique. And
well, let me ask you, Dr. Dave.
yeah,
When you're talking into the microphone and you publish the episodes, don't you do it because of the listeners? Don't you do it because people enjoy listening to your content?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
But
wouldn't it be nice to have a back and forth with them, like some kind of to feel them?
Yeah, I don't want that. See, I'm ready. I'm one and done.
Okay.
Okay. I put it out there. I don't want a lot of discussion. Maybe I don't want to get into a controversial area. Maybe they will disagree with me, etc. And I'm sort of I do it and I move on. And that's my personality as compared to your personality, which I see is just, really working for you and working for your audience. Have you done any formal surveys? I know I signed up in the early days with various organizations that were trying to monetize. And so I thought, okay, I don't want to be chopped liver here. I'll see if I can make some money, although that's not what motivated me to become a podcaster. And so I was affiliated with Pod Show. I mentioned in Adam Curry in the interview that you did with me, and he started something called Pod Show, brought in some other people, and it was the slogan was "Quit your day job," And that seems, you seem to have been able to quit your day job,
Mhm.
you know, and really focus on your podcasting. I certainly wasn't, through Podshow or any of the other things I became affiliated. None really kicked me off to that degree.
Mm.
So, what are there other episodes or topics that come to mind that are good examples of what we're talking about?
Other for the people sort of topics.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, uh, people are asking me today and yesterday to comment on Jonah Hill. He is an actor, and he is implicated as being abusive to his former girlfriend. She published a bunch of text exchange between her and him. I think, if I understand the story right, and people, it's a huge news story in a certain subsection of our culture, and they really want me to comment on it.
yeah,
So I will be doing that later today.
yeah. And, part of the reason why I don't do that sort of thing is I have difficulty making up my mind.
Hmm.
I can see both sides
Yeah.
of an issue, and that's in part that's kind of my gift as a therapist,
Hmm.
is to not have big judgments.
But
My
people
wife
want
is
that. I think it could be that's why they,
People do want that,
yeah,
right?
that because it's so rare to
Yeah,
have that sort of compassion and tentativeness to judge. Uh, and I'm not appreciated by most people on the internet. Most people that come across me don't like me because I mean, that's my impression anyway, because
uh,
I'm either boring to them, which is probably more likely. But if I'm not boring, then I piss them off because I don't take a side. And they think that I'm siding with the other side because I'm not siding with their side, but they don't know that I'm not siding with either side. And yeah, in the beginning, when I first started to gain notoriety a few years ago, I would have a real mixture of reaction. Now I have a core audience that know my thing and
yeah,
appreciate that part. You could absolutely do that sort of thing.
yeah. Except it's not in me to do that. Uh, um, yeah, I, I just don't tend to get that kind of clarity.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, because you and I know that things are way more complicated, and we get the opportunity to go deep with people and discover new things
right,
and
right.
nuances and how things germinate, how things develop, triggers that people have, and context. So that voice is needed on the internet.
I agree. I agree, and certainly your good evidence of that kind of proves that. I think in psychology slash psychotherapy, people perceive us as a bit mealy mouthed. That, oh, you guys never come out and say what you're really thinking or what's really going on. So you're going against that trend, and I think it's a great decision. Now it puts me in mind of hugely successful podcasters, of which there are a few who become very commercial. I'm thinking of Joe Rogan is the first name that comes to mind.
Mm.
What are your thoughts about Joe Rogan? And would you want to be like him? Would you
No.
want to? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't know that much about him. I remember listening to his podcast when it first started, when it was just him sitting on the floor with a friend and smoking weed. And it was
Yeah, I
just
don't
kind
go
of,
back that far with him, but
yeah. And it was just, it was kind of like hanging out with your friends and late at a party, and they're getting high and they're just sort of talking about UFOs and philosophy, and they don't know what they're talking about, but they like talking, and there's nothing wrong with that. Then it developed into what it is today. And I've only seen little clips, but um, you know, but no, in terms of content, I would never want to go in that direction. He has his audience and he does what he does well. But I learned last year that I had reached my limit regarding how famous I wanted to become. I'm not famous, but I'm, mildly, smally famous, I guess. And I became more famous last year because I was watching the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, and there was a lot of media coverage around that and a lot of attention, a lot of audience. And I was attracting a whole new group of people.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized that more attention and better marketing, if you will, was actually detrimental to my mental health. I was being attacked, in the way I was talking earlier, because I wasn't taking either side, because I'm watching a trial and I don't know who's right and wrong. I hear both stories. And so I would comment from that place of expertise. I'd say, well, when I hear that in my office, it can mean this, but I don't know. And sometimes people misremember or they lie and da da da. And so um, people on both sides, because there were pro Amber Heard people, there were pro Johnny Depp people, and I was pissing off everybody. Everyone, a large group of people hated me. There were campaigns on the internet to get me delicensed. They
Oh,
complained
really?
to they
Yeah.
complained to the licensing board and actually tried to get my license removed. It was unsuccessful because their allegations were ridiculous, and the licensing board saw it that way. Thank goodness. But I didn't like that at all. I it was I was losing sleep. I
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. I would.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when I turned on the microphone to make content, I was scared. I didn't feel safe.
Right.
I
Right.
I didn't want to say anything. I was just like I was tripping over every word because I was worried that someone was gonna. I mean, people are sending death threats. There were people
Oh,
that
man.
were making veiled threats about my family and stuff, and it was not where I want to go. So I have been actively trying to maintain whatever sort of level of market share, if you will, moving forward.
Yeah.
I don't want it to get any bigger.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. But I fully understand the reason why as you explain it. And, you're, turns out you're a sensitive guy, and that stuff gets through to you. Some of the other people out there don't seem to have any sensitivity and just blunder ahead, and make public statements. It's clear to me that you think your opinions, you think through.
Mhm.
Now, some people would raise an ethical issue here that that the ethics of APA and maybe both APAs, I'm not sure, suggests that we should not do any analysis of people that we haven't seen privately in therapy.
Mhm.
And you are venturing beyond that area.
Not
I'm,
technically. I'm a huge stickler for diagnosing from afar and the Goldwater rule. I never diagnose from afar. People sometimes think I am because they don't understand diagnosis, because I might be using it. I'm always using it as a jumping off point. I'll say, well, it kind of looks like this. That would be my first hypothesis if I were
yes.
to be hired. But I don't know because one, I don't have enough information. And two, it's unethical for me to diagnose from afar. I'm a huge stickler about that.
And I have heard that, that you're doing it with care, and, you know, you're putting out possibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I get that part too. Um,
And along those lines, over the years, because I'm a huge stickler for ethics. If you're, if you were one of my supervisees, you would know that I am annoyingly a stickler for ethics and law. Um, I don't know why exactly. I think I'm just like a rule follower or something. And so,
well, I saw that you've written a book. I didn't realize that you didn't mention it before, but you've written a book on supervision,
yeah.
and I went on Amazon and got what I could, looking at how people seem to be reacting, what they had to say about it, and all.
Hmm. I haven't read
And
those
in it,
reviews. So I should read those.
and in it, you share. As I began to, they let you read little bits and pieces, so I was able to kind of read your intro,
Hmm.
in which you share that you felt you had a bad supervision experience where the person basically suggested that you shouldn't be a therapist at all ever. Vamoose,
Yeah.
get out of this program, and yet your way of responding to that really was to turn that shit into gold, if I may say so, by really by first of all wrestling with it and then going after it in terms of your own spirit and sense of rectitude in the world, and challenging it intellectually and on substance. And so, you really turned it around to, as with the earlier example of apology and slap and so on,
Mm-hmm.
is you developed your own template for good supervision,
Mm-hmm.
which and supervision, that's it's always been such a sticky area in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I also felt burned by it at one point. I had there was a primo placement at the University of Michigan when I was in graduate school there. And there was the primo placement was called the clinic. And the lower rung one was the counseling center. Well, I was led into the counseling center, and so that's where I did a bunch of my got supervised early on. It was a big experience, but somebody who I don't know, I got feedback from one of the big time favorite supervisors who was an advanced graduate student, and basically she said I was a mediocre therapist and would never be anything more than that. And that was not based on much. I think she read a report that I wrote or something like that.
Yeah.
And and as here I was, a naive kid of what, 20 maybe, something like that, and just trying to find my way.
Yeah.
Uh, so that stuck with me all these years. That's in the back of my mind, just that, oh, never be anything more than mediocre.
Yeah.
Uh,
Awful.
and yeah, so it's an awful. So supervisors have so much power.
Yes.
They have the power to move ahead, not move ahead, get advanced in the career, not get advanced in the career. And often there's a conflict of interest in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're making their living by, they're part of either a clinic or a training program, that they make their money, etc. And somehow it can feel weird. It can feel weird. I just remember how weird it felt.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of issues there. So I'm just impressed that your response was to stand up for yourself and to write an important book
Yeah.
and to help stake out the ground. And that's really admirable.
Well, it took me 25 years to get there because
I can believe it.
when he told me that I was fired, and for context, I was 25, 24, and I had just started my first internship, and the internship only, at that point, was only like 5 weeks long. So I had been a therapist with clients for 5 weeks,
Right,
and
right.
what he was basing his termination of my internship on was just our conversations. And um, I sensed danger every time I talked to him, that I had to meditate even before sitting down with him because I didn't know what why I felt afraid of him. Later learned it was because he was out to get me, I think, from the beginning. He just didn't like me for I don't know what. I mean, we could speculate. I did confront him 20 years later, and he kind of apologized, but he admitted that I was his first supervisee. He didn't know what he was doing. Is basically what
Okay,
he
so
said.
he felt insecure and was
Yeah,
thrashing about
yeah,
as
yeah. And he
well.
talked about the agency was kind of going through a big drama chaos problem, and he thought that maybe I was caught up in that. I don't know, but I left that agency that day totally demoralized, thinking, okay, well, because I identified as a jock, as a frat guy. I didn't identify as a therapist sort of person, and no one saw
Uh,
me that way. I wasn't
uh-huh.
one of those individuals where everyone just considered me, oh, you got to go to Kirk for advice. Certain people are like that, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't like that, so I just thought, well, uh, imposter syndrome discovered, because I'm an imposter, because they just discovered I'm
Wow.
an imposter. They just fired me. But after 5 weeks, how the hell are you supposed to know? Anyway, I drive to my university, and one of my professors was there, and he talked me down and said, "Yeah, this happens sometimes, and this doesn't mean that you're a bad therapist. It just now, if you get fired at your next internship, then yeah, maybe you're a bad therapist, but get another internship, and usually things work out. We don't know, time will tell." And I was like, really? So that's an option? Because I thought that the program would get rid of me as well. And so I got another internship, a totally different supervisor, and we had a great relationship. She still a friend of mine. And then another professor at the university just took me on as a mentor and said, you should be a professor right after graduation. Like, so I
Wow.
graduated at 26 and started working as a professor right away. Not because I wanted to, but because he saw something in me, which was totally bizarre to me to this day, really. And then the rest of my career, everything was fine. I never had another problem with another supervisor, and never had another problem with an employer. It was just that first one. And you know, God bless the person, the professor that um, you know said no, like, don't give up, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, we've opened up such an area here that it's not what I had on as I was thinking. Let's talk about your. One of the things that's at play here is money. What are your where does money fit into your value system, and what are your core values?
Well, I've always just considered money to be a means to an end, right? The having and being an American and indoctrinated into our materialist culture means that I can't get away from that bias and that valuing of money and the hoarding of money and the buying of things and having fancy things. I can't get away from that impulse, but I fight against it all the time. Um, I want to provide for my family. I want to, uh, I don't know. I also give a lot to charities. We're giving away a scholarship actually right now, a $3,000 scholarship, which essentially me just giving away $3,000 to somebody, because it's just me.
Yeah.
I don't represent a giant corporation. So every year we give thousands of dollars to needy students, graduate
Wow.
students who are making a difference in the world. And so, I want to create something. One day, I want to create a foundation, me and my wife actually, where we, for free, train young parents with attachment and with their relationship, if they have a romantic relationship. Because research shows that with a little training, with a little intervention, some classes, some help, that it sets up an environment at home that will lower the likelihood of drug abuse in the children, divorce in the parents, crime in the children, relationship the child's relationships will improve moving forward, just all sorts of positive outcomes that research shows. But there's some efforts and some funding around that, but not enough. And so that's another thing that is a dream of mine to do.
Yeah, and I asked you about what are your core values, and it sounds like there's a lot rolled into what you've been saying. Um, but if let me ask you that question again, though. What do you
Yeah.
see as your core values?
Well, my core value has always been trying to make the world a better place.
Okay.
I don't know if I am, but I know I'm trying. And so that's what I think about as soon as I wake up in the morning. When I talk about Will Smith or Jonah Hill or Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm genuinely trying to make the world a better place. Depends on what I'm doing, but like with the Jonah Hill thing, I suspect that what I will be trying to do is validate people who have been abused, because people will see these texts that Jonah was sending, and it'll remind them of maybe the abuse that they went through. But I'm also trying to help the perpetrators. People out there will often contact me and say, by listening to your content, watching your videos, I have discovered that I am abusive to people in my life or to my partner. And the way that you talk about perpetrators, although you don't let them off the hook, you do have compassion. You do have a rare voice on the internet that doesn't just label and reject,
Yeah.
because I have treated many perpetrators in my life, in my office. And so they will tell me that they will begin the road to healing themselves and addressing their behavior themselves so that they don't abuse anymore. So that's why I do it. That's the only reason why I do any of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think one of the things that triggered my question about money, and is probably a little sour grapes on my part. There's some kind of a service or feature that I didn't know about, where I guess where you can create a short video. What's it called? This thing you talk about it on your show. You can create a short video by request, I guess, and
Oh,
you can
Cameo.
Cameo. Yeah, what is Cameo? Because I was totally new to that, and
Your
you
listeners
can.
would your listeners would love it if you were on Cameo. I just know it. I would like it if
Uh,
you were on Cameo. So
uh,
what people will do is they will pay whatever fee you set, and they will request like a happy birthday or happy anniversary or something. And usually it's a family member. So someone, one of your fans will have a spouse that knows that you have Cameo, and so they'll buy a Cameo from you, and then on their birthday, it's like a minute little happy. They usually will tell a little bit about the person, and you just sort of ad lib some sort of happy birthday thing, and then maybe a heartfelt message of some sort, and then it's really great. I've received cameo. People will get cameos from famous people for me, like NFL football players or other kind of people that I am fans of. And I tell you, like when I get a cameo from someone, even they don't know me, but it feels like they kind of do for a minute.
huh.
And yeah, it's just a great way to feel. You bring joy to people. People cry. I have proposed. Someone asked me to propose to their partner over Cameo, which was, I mean, just mind-blowingly an honor. You know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah.
so it's another way to feel connected. I don't make a living off of Cameo, but I guess I set a fee so that I don't get too many requests. Maybe that's why I kind of set the price a certain way, because
Yeah, it seemed a little high to me. I thought, God, there's no way that I could ask somebody for $100 for me to talk to them for a couple of minutes. Uh,
people, they'll it's a common thing that people pay for. It
yeah.
sounds bizarre, and it did in the beginning. And so Cameo, I didn't Cameo reached out to me, the business reached out to me and said you should be on
Wow.
Cameo. And I was like, I don't think anyone wants that from me. but I'm usually like, well, let's give it a shot and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I probably get a cameo once every couple days or something, so it's not frequent. But I get a kick out of it. I'll sing a song, I'll write a song about them, because I can write jingles and play on piano and the guitar.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
it's just a fun little thing. uh you know I If you did it, I guarantee you that people would want it. And it takes a bit to get used to in terms of the format, because it's a little weird. You get like a minute to just yammer, but once you get used to it, I find it to be a good way to connect. It's fun.
Well, we can test your hypothesis, folks. You've heard the pitch. If you want me to do a cameo, you know where you can find me. Um,
I mean, don't you get requests from listeners saying they would like you to make a little recording saying happy birthday to somebody, or don't you
no,
ever? Oh, really? Oh,
no. I've never gotten that. Um, but that's neither here nor there. You and I share what we discovered in the process of you interviewing me and then me now interviewing you. So many commonalities in our history and career, both having been in market research, both being drawn to psychotherapy, psychology, both being drawn to podcasting,
mhm,
um, and both being sort of pioneers in the way that we approach it.
mhm,
And so one thing that we had in common was that we were both went through some issues of around ethnicity and our family background, and that caused us some pain, some trauma.
mhm.
And you gave me lots of space to go into that on mine. Maybe I took too much. I'm not sure, but um, so let's talk about your experience, because uh, your father was not was your father is Japanese,
Mhm.
and successful business person, I believe.
A commercial artist for Boeing. He would
Interesting.
make brochures of planes to sell to airlines, or
Yeah,
displays, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And your mother was what?
He was
A
a
white woman?
daycare, yeah, a white European American woman, and had a home daycare for many years, and then had some office jobs as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds like my mother as well.
Did your
Um,
mom have a home daycare?
no, did
Oh,
not have home daycare, but she did. It's funny, when after I went to college, she started being an artist and entering different shows and so on, and then she became a secretary for at USC
yeah,
for professor. So I think in doing that, she felt some kinship to me becoming a psychologist,
yeah.
and because she came up in the Depression and did not get the the college experience that her intellect definitely would have merited,
Mm,
and I never felt like I could win an argument with her.
mm.
Even after having a PhD and so on, I always felt one down. But enough about me and more about you. So, what was your experience uh, in terms of racism? There were some experiences that you had that you felt like racism was at the root of it.
Oh yeah, and still do. It's hard to misinterpret someone just yelling a racial slur at you,
Yeah, that's true.
which still occasionally happens. It wasn't that long ago that I was in Seattle and came to a four-way stop, and I thought I got to the four-way stop first, yeah, but we were very close anyway. So I went through the intersection, and then the car pulled up behind me, and the young woman, white woman, for the record, jumps out of the car, starts pounding on my window and calls me a chink. So it's hard to misinterpret that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, throughout my life, names, assumptions, stereotyping, discounting, pigeonholing. Where are you from? I'd say, well, I'm from Seattle. No, where are you from? I'm from fucking Seattle. Well,
Yeah.
where are your parents from? Spokane, Washington. No, where are they from? I was like, okay, what about your grandparents? They're from Eastern Washington. They were born in Eastern Washington. No,
I
well,
know
where were,
that.
yeah. It's just like, well, okay, do you want me to give me the whole gene? I know what you're asking. My dad is of Japanese descent. Like, and you don't ask white people that. And why are you asking me that? Um, the first 50 times I was asked that in my life, it wasn't that big of a deal. But as time goes on, it just aggravates you because
Yeah.
it makes me feel like I'm a foreigner, and nothing wrong
Yeah.
with being a foreigner, but I'm definitely not a foreigner. Like my people are from Washington State and have been for over 100 years. And
Wow.
my white side goes back to the 1600s. So I should be asking you where you're from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this notion of otherizing and then stereotyping as well, like in the workplace, people will assume that I'm good with technology and math and this kind of stuff. Things that you associate with Asian Americans. I mean, incidentally, I am okay with technology and math, but that's neither here nor there. But as a therapist, as a person in psychology, I didn't want to be identified that way. I wanted to
Yeah.
be identified as someone that was good as a professor and as a therapist because I felt like I had worked hard to achieve a certain level of competence and to just be seen as not that because I don't fit the stereotype of a therapist or a professor because I'm half
Yeah.
Japanese. Um, it's not the end of the world, but it hurts and annoys me. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever gone to Japan
Yeah.
have you? Oh, you have. And
Just once. Yeah.
uh,
It was a pretty amazing experience. Yeah. Um, but Japanese American culture is so far afield from Japanese culture because my ancestors came over 120 years ago, and the language is different.
yeah,
The words that we use are a lot different. So I'm
fascinating.
the place that I feel at home is in Hawaii because there's a lot of what we call Hapa, meaning half East Asian, half white, or half East Asian, half whatever else. When I go to Hawaii, that's where I feel culturally at home.
Wow. Wow. I would think that Spokane, wait, Seattle rather, Seattle, where you are,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
there would be a large population of Asians there, and so I'm surprised to hear that. I mean, I grew up in L.A. and I always grew up with a lot of respect, I suppose, positive stereotypes that I had about Japanese who were gardeners and artistically inclined, it seemed, and clever with their hands. So I had all those stereotypes, but for me, they seemed kind of positive. Um, but yeah, it's hard to not be seen for who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's too bad we both, but those experiences are what make us and toughen us, right? And allow us to be as empathic as we are,
Mm-hmm.
because we know what it's like to suffer those kinds of slings and arrows, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So we talked about, oh, you in a conversation that we haven't had that many conversations, but somehow, oh, it was a question that you had thought you might want to ask me, which was, what are your thoughts about psychology today and where it's going?
Mm-hmm.
And I picked up from the question that a tone, that you weren't happy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about that. What's your feeling about psychology and where it's going today and how it's
Mm-hmm.
evolving?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's impossible for me to know for sure because I just have anecdotal experience and I guess some research along these lines. But my sense is that our profession is, although growing, and which is great, and there's more awareness and culture around us. Today it's much more likely you're going to hear someone say that they're going to therapy, a famous person or not, than
Yeah.
10, 20 years ago. It was much more shameful and or avoided completely. So we've succeeded in advocating as a field, you and I and the thousands of others, to raise awareness and to reduce stigma. So I think that's all fantastic. There are some side effects to that, like people bastardizing words like narcissism and gaslighting and love bombing and trauma bonding. There's a lot of misuse of terms and a lot of diagnosing from lay people about other lay people, and that is problematic in a lot of ways. And so that's not good. And I'm starting to see some students that have been taught by the internet in terms of what psychology is, and I have to deprogram them
Huh.
of those notions, and it's hard because they've been indoctrinated into a mindset about certain constructs in our field. So that's not great.
For
But
for example,
well, narcissism is a big one because uh, it's even getting worse by the day. There's narcissistic personality disorder. There's also a lot of other constructs in our field that we would label as narcissism. There's normal narcissism, healthy narcissism, Kohut and other kinds of writers and thinkers. So, I could go on a whole thing about that, but the way that people misuse it today is they basically use the word narcissism as a stand-in for a psychopath. And they also will think that any indication of psychopathy or narcissism means that they are a narcissist and they suffer from a personality disorder, instead of understanding that all of us are to some extent self-serving and will go into denial and are triggered by things. And so there's just, according to some people, literally half of the world suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. Uh, and it's destructive because, one, they're diluting the term, and two, they're just labeling someone and then rejecting them. It's just like they're rejectable instead of trying to work with people and trying to understand people anyway. And then if you're the victim of being accused of those kinds of things, like what do you say? It's hard to refute those kinds of just attacks. But what I'm worried about in our field is this movement away you come from humanistic psychology, and so do I. And I worry that our field will more and more lose sight of that tradition and not value it because it's not considered cutting edge. Some people don't consider it to be evidence based, even though it is. It sometimes is equated to like 70s hippie stuff and uh,
right, right.
irrelevant. It's not CBT. It's not neuroscience. And because we don't really have your generation is actually as you retire and move on from this plane, uh, you're the humanistic generation. You were the people that studied it and talked about it and spread the word and did it. And you don't see a lot of young people pioneering in that way. It's not the only tradition that I follow, but it's a major part of the tradition that I follow, not only clinically, but also just in life. The tenets, the philosophy, the mindset, the love that we give each other, the bonds that we have, the goodness, seeing the good in other people, is, I think, being forgotten. And I worry about that because I
Yeah.
think that's the core of therapy. I think that's, if anything, and that's what I tell people. It's like, because they're like, oh, there's all these theories. And I'm like, if you learn one thing well, it's humanistic psychology, because that you could literally just help 90% of your clients just within that realm. There's so much help
Ah,
that you can give people with that form of therapy.
yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
mean, what
one
do you think?
last,
Do you think do you see those kind of trends, or if it is true that we are losing that tradition, is that upsetting?
well, it has been, um, and I've sort of had to adjust my make adjustments to accommodate, where things were going, like particularly with the advent of uh, positive psychology and Seligman, who planted the stake there, which on the one hand sounded good, it had the right ring, but at the same time, he seemed to be dissing the whole history, the whole tradition, because and it's clear why he wanted to create that space, because the big concern was that there wasn't enough, it wasn't established with a solid research base. But actually, there've been, and I think the positive psychology movement has helped to flesh out, because all kinds of people have emerged under that banner who are doing research, respectable research, for years and years.
Mhm.
And that banner has brought them forward. So I've had mixed feelings about it, but originally I was pretty down on Seligman and uh, and and that.
Mhm.
I think what's of more concern to me right now is the juncture that we find ourselves in at a global level.
Mhm.
That are we in the last days or not?
Mhm.
And it's hard to know.
Mhm.
If you have thoughts, how's your optimism level? Are you able to be uh, long-term optimistic, or
I am of two minds. On one hand, I'm extremely pessimistic because, with, for example, climate change, we've
yeah,
known about the science for decades and decades, and you can make an argument that 20 years ago ish, most of the politicians were finally waking up to the science and realizing the doom that we are heading towards, and around the world, and yet it's only getting worse. It's
yeah,
just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. There are strides, renewables and stuff, but if you look at the big picture, we're we're not moving away from the doom. We're racing ever faster to the doom. What is that doom? Hard to know. But so on one hand, because I've known the science, or it's been convincing to me for 30 years ish, maybe longer. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s when I feel like every other topic we talked about in school was about environmentalism, because pollution and littering and all this kind of stuff. And
uh-huh,
so I grew up just constantly thinking about it and worrying about it. And so on one hand, so I would get my hopes up. I would hear a politician, or I'd think, I'd learn about a new advanced with solar technology or investments here, and I'd be like, oh, and then another report would come out, and we just had our most hottest year on record
right,
overall, right? So, and we're heading into an El Nino, which is going to heat up our part of the world even more for a number of years, as predicted. So, on one hand, I'm demoralized. I don't know if it's pessimistic, but you just get beaten down for decades. You get your hopes up, you advocate, you do what you can, and you just it's demoralizing. On the other hand, as a amateur studier of history, uh, both more recent and distant, uh, at any given point, it always feels to the population that things are about to go off the cliff. There have been many points in history in various different societies and cultures
right,
that it's like this is the end, and it wasn't the end. We as a race, the human race, we figure out some way of bouncing back or adjusting, or maybe it's a little bit too late. There's a lot of consequences. You could say World War I, World War II. There's certain events that are tragic and horrific, but we do bounce back. So with climate change, for example, will a billion people die around the planet or more, but we bounce back? I don't know. Will it be some worse version of our society where there's more bifurcation between the haves and the have-nots? I don't know. it's hard to tell. But in terms of our survival, I'd put my money on us still being around in a few hundred years, but I don't know.
Okay.
How do you
Yeah,
feel about it? How do you feel about it?
I'm as concerned about anything as the cultural divide, both, yes, the climate situation for sure, because that's such an absolute scientific reality, and then the kind of the the spread of authoritarian thinking and personalities and dominance. That's really got me worried as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And they're not unrelated, that
Mm.
the harder things, the harder we get pushed by climate and water issues and all these other issues, the the more likely that it's going to be to exacerbate the dark side of human nature.
Yeah. I bet you had a similar thought that when the internet came around and information became democratized, I thought it would eliminate conspiracy theories and science illiteracy. You have Wikipedia. Anyone could just look up the facts. It's
Right.
out there. And I just thought this is going to just destroy pseudoscience and nonsense and politicians who lie because it'll be so easy to detect them. But it went the opposite direction. It's
Yeah. You know,
people.
I'm a reflexively a technophile. I get excited
Yeah.
by technology and all the new toys and so, but I've become more jaded as time has gone by. Um, yeah, so
Yeah, like
that's where I am.
something like a quarter of Americans believe in some aspect of the conspiracy theory related to QAnon, that there's an elite reptile group of people that kill babies and drink their blood. Literally. I mean, a sizable percentage of Americans believe that there's a good chance that that's true, something along those lines.
Yeah,
And when I read those stats, I just was just completely shocked by that. It's
yeah.
one thing for a few percentage, it's still weird, but for like, 1 out of 5 or something like that. And I just thought, my God, like we are a dumb animal. just that we're just so easily manipulated and gullible. It's
Yeah.
really upsetting to see. And you got to figure projecting into the future, it's probably not going to get any better, right?
I think, where I am is now is we who have some version of the light need to keep doing what we do
Hmm.
and trying to keep that light shining. And so that's what you and I are devoted to, and what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I'm glad to have you in that corner, and I appreciate I appreciate your appreciation, and I appreciate you right back. So maybe
Yeah.
this is a place for us to wrap it up.
Yeah. As I said in our interview, it's this huge honor to, I mean, really, I was telling my wife that this could be argued like one of the pinnacles of my career to be on your show. I've been listening to it, like I said, for almost 2 decades, uh, uh, more religiously in the first number of years, the first, I don't know,
You're
15
pretty
years.
busy these days.
Yeah. And I also work from home. I don't commute. So I don't have a space to listen to podcasts the way that I used to. But your voice, your humility, your intelligence, your goodness, your warmth, your literal voice, it's very radio friendly, and if I might counter your supervisor or that you had when you were first starting out, I don't know what you're like as a therapist, but I would imagine that you were amazingly helpful when you had that career, because as a listener, um, it you learn something listening to your podcast, but also it can be moving, it can be soothing, it can stretch our minds as clinicians and as lay people. So yeah, and I know what it's like to wake up in the morning, because for the first number of years of my podcast, 7-8 years of my podcast, I was losing money doing it. I was just doing it for the love of it every day. And you've been doing it, and there are times when you wake up and you're just like, I don't know if I have the energy for this, but you do it anyway, and you find that inner power to step into that place to give people the content that they want, and to spread ideas that are going to be very helpful to people clinically and otherwise. So yeah, it's just a huge honor that honestly, that you even know who I am. let alone
likewise.
let alone that I'm on your podcast. I remember when I started my podcast, I was the third or fourth psychology podcast in the English speaking world anyway. And you were already a giant in psychology podcasting in 2008. And I just thought, like, oh, if I could ever even come close to Dr. Dave and his achievements and what he's doing, I never did, really, because I didn't go in the direction that you did. Like I tried to get actual guests like you. There have been times when I would try to get those kinds of authors and whatnot, and they just wouldn't respond to my email, and probably still don't. So so in some ways, I'm still aspiring to get to your level.
Well, thank you. I'm humbled. Okay, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.